So, before we get into the reading, I wanted to say that I put on my best pajamas for this. No big deal. And I just wanted to make this so that we could kind of just relax together. I know that the holidays are stressful, and it's nice for someone to just read to you once in a while. So if you feel sleepy, feel free to fall asleep. It is going to be a nonfiction book after all. And I know that you mentioned that chamomile tea helps you to relax, so I've prepared some in the open head of the squirrel mug. He is also holding an acorn, like many of the things that I buy, apparently. So I'm just going to hand that to you. Okay, so it's not going to come as any shock that I chose a nonfiction mushroom book to read to you tonight. And the title, of course, is Fungipedia. And it has a beautiful big red fly agaric mushroom on the front. The combination of the purple and the red usually I don't love, but on this book I really enjoy it. And it's by Lawrence Millman. On the back it has, a good quote about the book. It'd be funny if it was bad. It just says, "This sucks," in quotation marks. Anyways, it says, "With whimsy, wisdom, and deep knowledge, abetted by Amy Porter's thoroughly charming drawings, Lawrence Millman has conjured the most interesting, readable, and useful fungus book ever. His introduction, full of art and mirth, is the best essay I have read on this mysterious kingdom." It is a very good book. I do recommend it. Today I'm just going to be reading us the introduction. And here is kind of the illustration that they're talking about. I think it's watercolor. They're kind of smattered throughout the book. It's very, very nice. But before I read the preface, I should mention that the dedication page is the type is set in the shape of a mushroom, which I think is wonderful. And it says, "This book is dedicated to all fungi, even the toxic ones, in honor of their ability to astonish, amuse, and often humble me." Which I think I ended up including in my thesis because I loved it so much. And before the preface begins, there's a quote on the left page. There's a few, but my favorite one is, "There is something absolutely fascinating to me about being present at the exact moment when a mushroom is mushrooming." And that's a quote from John Cage, who I believe is a composer before he was a mycologist, but kind of became a tandem composer-mycologist, which is admirable as someone who would like to do that. Not compose. I don't think I can compose. I don't think I'm smart enough for that. I mean art. Anyways, preface. Let me preface the preface by saying there are a lot of scientific names, binomial nomenclature, in this section. So you're about to find out what a fool I really am, and we're going to sound it out together. Anyways, the preface. "The humblest fungus displays a life akin to our own," wrote Henry David Thoreau in his journal in 1858. This observation shows Thoreau's usual pre-science, since recent phylogenetic analysis of DNA have determined that fungi occupy a branch on the tree of life surprisingly close to our own branch. The same analyses also indicate that the reader of this Fungipedia and the chanterelles he or she is getting ready to cook had the same distant ancestor, probably an organism not unlike the present-day marine choanoflagellate, which, if I remember correctly from marine biology, is this little sperm thing. It's a single-cell organism that is similar to human life, to mammals, to any multi-celled life anyways. But our similarity with the inhabitants of kingdom fungi are not simply genetic. Neither fungi nor we possess the green pigment known as chlorophyll, so we can't make sugars from sunlight or CO2, and thus we're obliged to obtain our food from living or dead organic matter, animal or vegetable. Both of us have evolved special enzymes that allow us to digest this matter, although we tend to grab and then engulf it, while fungi turn it into liquid form. Speaking of food, certain fungi can be extremely picky, like some of us, about their dietary needs. One species, Hepomyces stylopage, dines only on the hairs of cockroach antennae. Another, Cephalosporium lamelicola, eats only the tips of stalactites in caves. Trichomatocyte species live in the hindguts of aquatic arthropods such as mosquito larvae, and a newly discovered species, Alisophila vulgaris, can be found only on leaf litter moistened by elk urine. Such substrates might actually seem quite pleasant compared to those at the ruined Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukraine, where various fungal species are currently dining on leftover radiation. This is not very pleasant ASMR reading. I apologize. I promise it gets better. Given the similarities between fungi and our species, it's not surprising that we relate to fungi differently from the way we relate to plants. They inspire us in phobic reactions, total delight, anthropomorphic thoughts. In Russian, an old person is called a starry grib, a dried up mushroom. Fictional monsters, postage stamps, disgust. The Greek physician Nicander called fungi the evil ferment of the earth. And, in the case of the Mazatec curandera, Maria Sabina, who called the magic mushrooms children of God, deification. They also inspire animation. Walt Disney provided the fly Garrick, Amanita muscaria, with a role in the dancing mushroom sequence in Fantasia, but he didn't even give a minor part in the film to a sashaying phragmites or a sedge. Don't really know what a phragmites is or a sedge. How fungi arrived in our world has also been a prod to the human imagination. In Lithuania, fungi were once considered the fingers of Velnius, the one-eyed Baltic god of the dead, reaching up from on the underworld to feed the poor. In parts of India, Bangladesh, and East Asia, they are still thought to originate from a urinating dog. Far more common is the belief that they came from the world above us rather than the terrestrial or subterrestrial world. The ancient Greeks thought that they were the product of seeds placed on lightning bolts by Zeus. An old Persian legend attributes them to a sky goddess shaking the lice from her trousers, and the contemporary Inuit of the central Canadian Arctic believe that mushrooms are the anak of shooting stars, since they often appear on the tundra the morning after a shooting star leaves a trail of detritus across the night sky. You know, I think that I read somewhere, it might have been on Tumblr, so don't take this as gospel, but I believe that somewhere in Japan they still do believe, or maybe found proof, that lightning did cause a certain type of fungus to be encouraged to grow. And I'll have to do research on that, but it reminds me of the ancient Greeks, the product of seeds placed on lightning bolts by Zeus. Kind of similar to that. Anyways, in the previous paragraph, I've used the word mushroom that usually refers to a fungus with an umbrella-shaped fruiting body as well as pores or gills beneath a cap. Examples include the king bolete, Boletus edulis, my favorite mushroom, so-called buttons, Agaricus bisporus, and the beautiful but deadly destroying angel, Amanita bisporigera. I think that's bisporigera. Yeasts aren't mushrooms, but they are fungi. Likewise, rusts, polypores, mildews, puffballs, bread mold, and dead man's fingers, all members of the fungi kingdom, aren't mushrooms either. Such distinctions don't really matter unless a person is writing a scholarly paper in which he or she should never refer to a dead man's finger as a mushroom. In this not necessarily scholarly Fungipedia, I'll be using the two words more or less interchangeably. Whenever possible, I'll also be using the common names such as dead man's fingers and destroying angel rather than Latin binomials. This makes it easier for me to read. You know, I read this in my head, of course, and I never had to worry about pronouncing the binomial nomenclatures, but now I'm feeling a bit insecure reading this out loud. Other words I'll be using with a certain abandon are possibly, probably, perhaps, maybe, usually, typically, and sometimes, or their equivalents. For mycology, from Greek mycos, fungus, and logon, discourse, is a relatively young pursuit, and many aspects of it have not been fully or even curiously investigated. Also, virtually every known mycological rule has exceptions. For example, a wood-inhabiting fungus that's supposed to grow on conifer logs might occasionally take up residence on deciduous logs, and vice versa. Perhaps the mycelium has made a mistake. Perhaps stressful weather conditions have made it choose any proverbial port in a storm. Perhaps the fungus just wants to be different, or maybe it wants to confuse or even humble us humans. Anyone who has devoted long hours to trying to identify a fungal specimen can appreciate that last example of anthropomorphic thought. By now the reader has probably finished cooking the chanterelles and might be wondering whether to put them in an omelet, serve them with a steak, or dunk them into bean soup. To learn the answer to this question, consult James Beard or Julia Child, but you needn't bother leafing through this Fungipedia because it's not a cookbook. Rather, it's a compendium of ecological, scientific, ethnographic, and occasionally just plain weird fungal love. It also includes a biographical information about mycologists, such as, for instance, the fact that the bolete expert Walter Wally Snell was once a catcher for the Boston Red Sox. Meanwhile, a car is exploding outside. Here I should confess that I regard edibility, prejudice alert, perhaps the least interesting aspect of any fungus. So I won't be discussing the edibility of most fungi unless the species happens to be corn smut, a traditional food eaten by the Aztecs. Okay. Or unless the diner happens to be a mite, a beetle, or even an amoeba, certain species of which depend on other fungi for their survival. Or unless that diner is another fungus cheerfully engaging in cannibalism. An example of a fungal cannibal is the parasite Hypomyces lactiflorum, attacking a russula or a lactarius and transforming it into a lobster mushroom. Just as we like to eat fungi, certain fungi like to eat us, or at least parts of us. They're found in our oral cavities, on our skin, in our lungs and vaginal tracts, and on our nails. 267 different species have been documented in our guts, where they probably help metabolize sugars. Occasionally, fungi even grow on our brains. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because I don't want to read about diseases and the breaking down of corpses. As interesting as it is, it might not appeal to everyone, understandably so. So let's move on to trees. This is talking about trees. Now let's look at healthy trees and other plants. Between 90 and 95% of them have fungi as their significant others, for they have nutrients for carbs relationship via their roots with those fungi. Indeed, it's possible that plants developed roots not long after they became terrestrial in order to connect with fungi. If plants could speak, they might say to their fungal partners, "I'll give you carbohydrates if you give me nitrogen and phosphates, as well as help me with my water uptake." To which the fungus might reply, "My pleasure, mate." Actually, plants and fungi can speak to each other, or at least communicate with each other, via diffusible molecules, by which either one can express a need to the other for nutrients. Such relationships are known as mycorrhizal, from the Greek word mykos, fungus, and rhiza, root. An ectomycorrhizal relationship is one in which the fungus forms sheaths around the plant's roots, while an endomycorrhizal relationship is one in which the fungus penetrates the cell of those roots. Without one or the other of these partnerships, trees and other plants would be, at best, scrawny versions of their partnered selves. Here I might add that mycorrhizal fungi. Did I just switch up the way I said fungi? I don't know, it felt right in that moment. Both pronunciations are correct. Fungi also sequester vast amounts of carbon in the forest floor, thus preventing that carbon from escaping into the already too carbonated atmosphere. In any relationship, one partner can make the other miserable. So it is with parasitic fungi and their hosts. I guess I'm just saying it fungi now. Think of the numerous Ophiocordyceps species that attack insects or their overwintering larvae. Think of a Dutch elm disease, Ophiostoma species, chestnut blight, Cryphonectria parasitica, ash dieback disease, Hymenoscyphus fraxineus, and beech bark disease, Neonectria species. You guys should be proud of me for getting through that one. Think of honey mushrooms, Amarilla species, obstructing the flow of nutrients from a tree's roots to its trunk. Even think of the Cladosporium species that degrades stained glass windows. It's too bad that none of the hosts can take out a restraining order against such disagreeable partners. But if the fungus were gifted with words rather than diffusible molecules, it might respond to the putative compliments of its host by saying, "Hey, we parasites gotta live too." The more philosophical of them might add, "Life comes from dying." Wood-inhabiting fungal parasites create homes for cavity-nesting birds such as chickadees and warblers. They also create niches for specialist invertebrates such as beetles, spiders, and annelids. Since they usually infect older trees, wood-inhabiting fungi open the forest canopy for younger trees, and once that canopy is open, ground plants take over that space that might once have been denied them. Thanks, friends, for serving as agents of habit restorations. Both these trees and other plants might remark to the fungal parasites in question if they themselves could talk. As the union of at least one fungus and an alga, or a cyanobacterium, a type of bacteria that obtains its energy from photosynthesis, lichens represent a different type of parasitic relationship, one in which the fungus keeps its partner as a slave. More whimsically, that partner has been described as a damsel in distress. Although lichens happen to be members in a good standing of the kingdom fungi, no less than an oyster mushroom or a destroying angel, mycologists and lichenologists are often either ignorant about or indifferent to each other's disciplines. Indeed, my own knowledge of lichens is relatively limited, so I've included only a tidbit of information about them in this Fungipedia. In my defense, I should say that other books about fungi, guidebooks or otherwise, don't usually include a lot of information about lichens either. Perhaps one of these days a lichenologist will cobble together a lichenopedia. Maybe the reader of this book hasn't been cooking chanterelles at all. Instead, maybe that reader has been making a tea from chaga or reishi to cure gout or hemorrhoids, or at least stimulate his or her immune system. Or maybe he or she is taking turkey tail or cordyceps supplements in capsule form for the same purpose. For fungal medicinals have become a global rage. Is it medicinal? Is rapidly replacing? Is it edible? As the most popular question asked of mycologists. I'll investigate this last subject in my following pages, but for now let me mention my own favorite fungal medicinal, a walk in the woods in search of fungi. The experience of such an extraordinary variety of shapes, tongues, ears, erect phalluses, corals, teeth, birds' nests, orange peels, cannot help but make a person feel, if not healthier, at least more buoyant. And since fewer than 5% of all fungi species have been described, there's always the chance of finding a species new to science. But even if you find only a species old to science, you might still have the same reaction to it as composer mycologist John Cage did when he found a perfectly ordinary mushroom and exclaimed in his diary, "Supreme good fortune, we're both alive." And that is the preface to Fungipedia. I got through some of those scientific names better than I thought. If you are asleep, I completely understand. It's pretty dry information, but I do think it's well written. I will see you hopefully very soon. I'm posting a bit irregularly because my workload has been pretty crazy lately, but it was nice just to spend this time with you. So rest well, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day or evening or night or morning.